Hello, my name is Steven Castro, and I am a graduating senior majoring in studio art at Swarthmore College. This past year, I have been exploring light and sculpture as a means of expression, and have chosen to focus on this exploration in my senior thesis. My senior thesis touches on various interests and influences that have been present not only throughout my life, but especially this past year. With so much time spent at home due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I was forced to really look into my past and examine why and how light captivated me in so many different ways. Whether it was harsh, buzzing fluorescence interacting with groceries against a bare kitchen wall, or warm sunlight hugging the folds of the couch, light played into the drama of my life and the way I chose to perceive my reality. To go a little into my idea for the installation and the background, I wanted to begin with how this idea started and then move on to my process and choice of materials. I began contemplating ideas during the summer. I was able to spend much time driving for my job, and I could observe the various ways natural light interacted with homes, brownstones, metal gates, car plates, rear view mirrors, sidewalks, and the various landscapes throughout New York City. I was very much interested in the moments of light and shadow I was able to take in a short window of time. There was a large range of moods and expressions that you could take in while waiting for the light. Sometimes in surprising juxtapositions, kids in everyday wear seem ecstatic to be noticed, while bohemians decked out in fashionable outfits looked bored. At a time when touch is at a premium, I found comfort and envy in observing these small moments of affection. How light was both intrusive and natural in its embrace of a bicycle, a market, a vendor, a bridge. I wanted to explore the emotional mechanics behind sunlight and the structure it gives our everyday experiences, whether it's around a dinner table or a game of basketball. There's a sense of warmth and familiarity intrinsic to sunlight. A painting that helped me understand these scenes of everyday life was Caravaggio's The Calling of St. Matthew. It's dramatic, crystal clear, and so visceral that you feel exposed, vulnerable, and involved. In this painting, we see the moment Jesus Christ calls Matthew, the tax collector, to be his disciple. What drew me to this painting was how it made sense right away. The story made sense. But another strong impression is the intensely dramatic play of light and shadow, called tenebrism. The light heightens the senses. You can see the indecisiveness, feel the tension, and hear the murmurs. What I drew from this painting was the treatment of the figures in this one particular scene. This is a scene represented through painting, frozen in time, and I wanted to do the same through my interest in the psychology of the figure, or in my installation, the absence of the figure. How could I trigger a moment that feels exposed for both the viewer and the figures? I took the strong source of the sun to be that dramatic quality that heightened this scene to a vulnerable one. There's a tension between the artist and their creation, and this is something I continue to grapple with. Many of the symbols and forms and shapes I used in my installation are sourced from my own experience. I was trying to unify my experiences, my sources of inspirations, and my motivations, and return it in an experience that someone else could recognize or know or attempt to understand. I wanted to promote richness of meaning, but also an ambiguity in the work inherent in the experiences of the home, of family, of drama. This ambiguity takes shape around the tensions inherent in family experiences. Now I'll begin talking a little bit more about materials, process, and my development. I began with simple sketches using graphite and charcoal to better capture the contrasts of light and shadow on everyday objects like fruit, people, and anything else I could find lying around my house. Because of the pandemic, I was able to really analyze my family and our dynamics. I wanted to use a dinner scene as a means of getting at the drama of my life, but also on a more neutral level where I can focus on form. This way, I could really look at this dinner scene as an interaction between form and light, between figure and light source. When the semester began, I was grappling with this idea of the canvas. I had all of these various components of music, art, and philosophy that all wanted to become one large canvas. I wanted to use these inspirations to create large drawings and portraits of my family with a focus on form and light. However, I was so accustomed to thinking about art two-dimensionally that I wanted to break out of that shell and also explore how three-dimensional forms could not only interact with light, but somehow elevate the drawings and furthering the dynamics between light and shadow. I wanted to force myself to not only think about light two-dimensionally. I knew I could see light differently and capture its dynamics differently if I forced myself to make art in a new way. This idea that art could become warped and forced and given structure out of a two-dimensional canvas informed my approach to the design. I realized that my inspiration for a drawing would be the same for a sculpture, so I began exploring light not only on paper, but also with three-dimensional forms. At the same time, I was taking ceramics, so I used clay to create multiple dinner scenes just by making chairs and dinner tables and food or other things you would find on a dinner table. These are images of the clay and clay dinner tables. I ran through various iterations using my family as sort of test subjects and using their personalities and gestures to capture the affection and humanity I was searching for that would eventually interact with a light source. Focusing on form to try and capture their personas, traits, gestures, and idiosyncrasies, I was relying on symbolism and overall patterns of shapes that could embody a certain mood or a certain gesture. A circle with indented circles as a base with two supporting semicircular shapes is more soft, stony, austere, dignified, as opposed to your classical four-legged chair with a square base. I used a classic four-legged chair as inspiration for most of the chairs. I made this decision to make the association clear between the chairs and the mood it was embodying. Using a basic chair form, 4 legs, a backrest, and 2 armrests allowed me to play with the form a lot more fluidly and eliminate any details that would distract from the form-mood relationship I was going for. Furthering this idea of the dinner scene and looking at form and light, I also began to think about this idea of a story. I looked to films for inspiration since they carry a drama inherent to cinema. Movies are very much like real life, but given additional structure and direction. So much like a director, I began to think about the chairs and dinner table not only as forms that can convey and express moods and gestures and emotions, but also a story. In this way, I was able to focus on the dinner scene collectively and think about how each character plays a different role in this scene. Why is one character seemingly looking away? Why is another looking to the ground as if studying the grain of the wood? One art piece that inspired me was The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago, an installation piece regarded as the first epic feminist artwork that influenced my work. The scene was grand in scale and crystal clear in quality. There was an order and structure given to the names of women. It was this particular symbolic quality that made this installation iconic and grand. There was a symbolic meaning behind the dinner scene other than the scene itself through the collection of various different table settings, such as tablecloths, napkins, plates, etc. The controlled lighting in the installation also contributed to this overall iconic scene, a scene where something important is taking place. I carried over how Judy Chicago created an ordered scene around a dinner table. I decided to look at the dinner table as the grounding force in the scene. Much like in her installation, the story is getting told around a dinner setting. It is the place not only where conversations happen, but also where decisions get made. Looking to films, I was also able to understand the forms themselves differently. The form itself could be used as a means of probing the form of the chair. A typical chair around a dinner table can be manipulated to convey a different idea of that same chair without changing what it is, a chair. In this same way, I realized that benches, stools, and four-legged chairs have a boundary between appearing anthropomorphic and simple chairs, with an anomaly, such as a backrest turned upside down. With this frame of thinking in mind, I could intentionally make these chairs anthropomorphic and hence rely more so on this idea of chairs as containers of the people using them as opposed to chairs as platforms elevating the people using them. Thinking about chairs as forms embodying personas, I mixed in light. It wasn't yet important what kind of light, just that the interaction between form and light created a sense of drama, a story. It was here that I was able to really transition into using mapboard and foam core. Both of these materials worked to my advantage a lot better than the clay since I was naturally steering into more rectilinear forms. It was at this moment that I was able to better create anthropomorphic forms, embodying moods and personas from people I knew and trying to remember and predict what they would do in different scenarios around a dinner table. Simply connecting two rectilinear pieces would create a forearm, an arm, or a leg and a knee. The goal was to reduce all of the details within a typical chair so you could still recognize the chair form with respect to the dinner table. In this way, others could also recognize them as chairs, but with certain personas. Again, running light tests with a studio light, I could create sharp contrasts between light and shadow, especially with the rectilinear forms I created. What I noticed was that the chairs I settled on were somewhat between anthropomorphic and simple chairs with unconventional placements of armrests and backrests. Looking at them from various different angles, I noticed that they remained somewhere between that line. I wanted to preserve the simplicity of the chairs for this reason, and it's why I decided to keep them rectilinear and geometric. This was a reflection much like how I saw people and places and the overall streetscape from my time driving in the summer. People and places passing by and seemingly frozen yet very gestural under the burning sun. In this light, I also experimented with wood to retain that domestic feel. So I ran some tests with chairs made out of 1/4-inch plywood and spray painting them white to carry over the experimental sterile quality achieved through the foam board versions. With a movie-making frame of thinking, I realized that what I was interested in was more of an installation. I was trying to transport this idea of a dinner scene onto a blank 3-dimensional canvas, which would eventually be the empty room at the List Gallery. I was trying to look ahead in this way, and it made sense that a scene would need an environment. In this way, the dinner scene can be needled by anyone. It can be understood and referenced in various different ways. So I became attached to this blank white box that would look as if it was dropped in the middle of the room, and the light source would be contained within where no one could see it. Olafur Eliasson is an installation artist to help me think about how I could better understand light. He looks to natural landscapes for inspiration and often brings those natural qualities into his installations. How could I better control my source of light within the box that I was thinking about in a way that influences perception? How could I better signal what my light source is? Much like how Eliasson deals with color, light, and perception, I looked at how my light source could influence all those qualities, specifically with how I can change the overall mood of the scene. I experimented with different versions of rooms. Maybe the dinner scene is one room taken out of a house, or a room within a home, or a room within a room. I experimented with single rooms and creating a shell around that room with the shell and walls of the room. I was able to set up angles and openings where people could look at the scene from without the room and shell. How would the viewer's perception of the dinner scene, or rather a single chair from a certain opening, change their perception of that chair or scene? How did I want them to look at these chairs? Paying attention to their forms in the light and shadow interplay. To emphasize this, I reduced the room to a room within a room. In this way, I could control the viewer's eye to look at the forms. Looking to films again, I also wanted the dinner scene to tell a story. How could I elevate the story that I wanted with the room? So it was a question of how the story should be perceived. I wanted to retain the domestic aspect of a dinner scene. In this way, a story is preserved, but the openings made me think more critically about how I was experimenting with the room. And it was this realization that made me want to frame it in this way. I wanted the viewer to look as if they were looking in, as if they were peeping inside a dinner scene. This voyeuristic effect came about by treating the openings more like holes, places where viewers could either see inside or not see inside. I treated these holes like windows. In this way, it would retain both a domestic feel, but by keeping it very simple with no details, just an opening, and it could also be holes to peep inside. Ai Weiwei's Sacred is another piece that influenced the scale of my installation. The scale was at an awkward height that was neither human scale nor incredibly small, which aligned with the voyeuristic qualities I was aiming for. In the same vein, I wanted to treat my box as a container of a scene rather than a specific scene, and I was interested in creating a language between the inside and outside through scale, color, and shapes and forms of both the openings and the windows. Throwing light into the mix now meant using it to work with the room and the chairs collectively. I decided to make the dinner scene more specific. I wanted it to reflect how I felt during the summer. For this, I used a studio light and a small sheet of insulating foam to diffuse the light. I also used a small lens that would project a circular light to really focus the intensity of the sun. Treating the light as something hidden behind a curtain allowed me to treat the room more like a stage or a movie scene, which only elevated the voyeurism I was going for, able to retain that voyeuristic feel. I could control the light source better and sharpen the light and shadow interplay. It also allowed me to look at this idea of a dropped-off box differently. I looked at it more as a home. I took inspiration from many New York apartment buildings where the facade is usually given the most treatment in terms of aesthetics, and I wanted to retain that same feature by focusing on how the viewer sees the home as soon as they walk into the gallery. After many crits, I realized that the bareness of the box needed a roof to retain the domestic, homey feel. Again, using New York apartment buildings as inspiration, I took the crown moldings of those apartment buildings and turned it into a volume. This allowed me to keep the roof flat while also focusing on form. Looking inside, I focused on scale and geometry. I wanted the inside to remain bare and the dinner scene to appear a lot smaller. To achieve this, I focused on the proportions of the chairs and the windows and doorways that would be inside. This emphasized the contrast in scale between exterior and interior. This juxtaposition would carry over in how I decided to decorate the windows and facade that would be visible to the viewer upon entering. For the windows, I decided to play with shape, form, and iconography. I looked at the windows conceptually. What are windows? How does light travel through windows? What makes a window a window? Specifically, I looked at how windows are decorated and how they filter, diffuse, and scatter light. Curtains, blinds, and other decorative attachments are very simple and pragmatic in use. I used various shapes abstracted from curtains, blinds, and general window frames to explore the dynamic iconographic quality of their forms and shapes. I used white cotton t-shirts to carry over the domestic feel and keep everything cohesive with the white, sterile quality. Overall, my senior thesis was a good exploration of light and shadow to represent a story. I was able to delve deeper into my past experiences as a source of inspiration. In particular, the family unit. This represents an instance around a dinner table, a scene where the warmth of the light clashes or harmonizes with the shadows of the figures. I would like to conclude this presentation by thanking Jacqueline Tull from the Makerspace, Jay Johnson from the Engineering Department, Doug Herron, Randall Exxon, Logan Greider, Ron Tarver, Neil Patterson, Aaron Weary, Stacy Pimento, and Karen Brandon from the Art Department, Helen Ha, Yushan Wu, and Andy M.